My daughter looked me straight in the eye and told me I was too old to decide anything. Her words cut deeper than she realized, but I smiled and signed the papers she handed me. 2 days later, her husband opened their bank app and started screaming so loud the neighbors could hear. That same night, I had 41 missed calls lighting up my phone. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Henry Marshall. I'm 72 years old, a retired school principal who spent most of his life teaching kids how to respect themselves and respect others. I live alone now in the house where I raised my daughter, Clara, after my wife passed away when Clara was just 15. That house carries every memory of my life, the laughter, the tears, the birthdays, the Christmas mornings. To me, it isn't just bricks and wood, it's home. Clara is 38 now. She's smart, confident, and sometimes too quick to believe she knows better than anyone else. When she married Ethan, I thought she had finally found stability, but I soon realized Ethan's eyes were always fixed on money. He worked in finance, carried himself like he owned the world, and treated me as if I were a fragile old man who should just hand over the keys to everything. I remember the first time Clara mentioned me moving out of my house. She sat at my kitchen table, looking at me with that practiced smile of hers. "Dad, you can't stay in this big old place all by yourself. It's too much for you. Ethan and I can take care of things. You just need to let go a little." I stirred my tea slowly, pretending not to feel the sting in her words. "Let go of what, Clara? The house? My life? Or the right to decide for myself?" Her smile faded, replaced by a sharper tone. "Dad, you're 72. You shouldn't have to worry about these things anymore. Let us handle it. You need our help." Help. That's what she called it. But to me, it felt like control. It felt like she was taking the father who had guided her all her life and pushing him into the corner like a child. Ethan, of course, made things worse. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone as if the whole conversation was beneath him. "Henry, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've got savings, assets, a house that's worth a fortune. Let Clara manage it. She knows what she's doing. We'll make sure you're comfortable." The way he said it made my blood boil. Comfortable, as if I were some burden they needed to package away. But I didn't show anger. Instead, I smiled. I had learned long ago that sometimes silence and patience can speak louder than shouting. Still, inside me was a storm. I wasn't just a father. I wasn't just a retiree. I was a man who had built his life from the ground up, who had faced loss, raised a child alone, and given everything for family. And now my own daughter was telling me I was too old to make choices about the life I had built. That night, as I sat on my porch with the cool air brushing against my face, I knew one thing for certain. They believed they had already won. They thought I was weak, but they had no idea I was already preparing my next move. The very next morning, Clara arrived at my house with a folder tucked under her arm. She looked businesslike, as if she were walking into a meeting rather than visiting her father. Ethan trailed behind her, his tie still crooked from work, his face buried in his phone. I was sitting at the dining table with my newspaper folded neatly in front of me, pretending to read, but already knowing why they had come. "Dad," Clara began, her tone firm but soft enough to sound caring, "we need to talk about your future." I set the newspaper aside and looked at her. "What about it?" She exchanged a glance with Ethan, then slid the folder onto the table. "These are papers that will make things easier. They give me the legal right to help you manage your finances, your property, even medical decisions if needed. You've worked hard your whole life, but it's time to let someone else take that responsibility. You don't need the stress." Her words were wrapped in sweetness, but the edges were sharp. I could see the rehearsed calm in her expression, the way she folded her hands like a professional closing a deal. Ethan finally looked up from his phone, his smirk already telling me he thought this was a done deal. "Henry," he said, leaning forward, "this is just common sense. You're retired. You shouldn't have to juggle bills, taxes, property upkeep. Clara and I can handle it. All you need to do is sign." I studied the folder without opening it. My heart felt heavy, but not from fear. It was disappointment. The daughter I had raised, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the young woman I had cheered for at her graduation, was now standing over me like a lawyer trying to strip away my dignity. I leaned back in my chair. Do you think I'm capable of making choices? Clara's smile thinned. Dad, don't take it the wrong way. It's not about you being incapable. It's about making sure everything is safe and in order. You've done enough. Let me do this for you. For me. That was the phrase she used, but I could see through. This wasn't for me. It was for her and for the man standing next to her. Ethan reached for the folder and tapped it with his finger. Just sign it. You'll still live here. You'll still be comfortable, but we'll have the rest. It's better this way. I held his gaze for a long moment. My silence made him shift comfortably his chair, but Clara stepped in again before he lost his temper. Dad, please. You taught me responsibility. You always said planning ahead was important. This is me planning ahead for you. Her words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they twisted the very lessons I had given her into weapons against me. She was using my own wisdom to justify taking away my independence. I finally opened the folder. Inside were neat stacks of legal documents, power of attorney, property rights, bank account access. Clara's name filled every line where mine used to hold authority. I felt my hands tighten on the edge of the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. If there was one thing age had taught me, it was the power of patience. I closed the folder and looked at her. Clara, do you really believe I'm too old to decide what's best for myself? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her lips together and lowered her eyes, as if avoiding my gaze would make it easier. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but her words broke something inside me. Yes, Dad, you are. The room was quiet for a long moment. Ethan leaned back with a smug look of victory, as though my silence meant surrender. Clara reached across the table, slid a pen toward me, and whispered, Please, Dad, just sign. I took the pen. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or remind her of everything I had sacrificed to give her the life she had. Instead, I smiled and signed where she pointed. Her face lit up with relief, Ethan's with triumph. They thought they had won, but what they didn't know was that weeks earlier, I had already sat down with an old friend of mine, a lawyer who had stood by me for decades. We had carefully moved my savings into a trust with protections even Clara couldn't touch. My house, my accounts, everything they thought was about to fall into their hands had already been secured. The papers I signed that day gave them access to almost nothing. I handed the folder back and said calmly, There, now you don't have to worry anymore. Clara hugged me, mistaking calm for gratitude. Ethan clapped his hands together and said, Smart move, Hen. You won't regret this. As they walked out the door, I sat alone at my table, staring at the empty teacup in front of me. My chest ached, not from fear of losing anything, but from the knowledge that my own daughter saw me as a burden instead of a father. That hurt more than anything, but I also knew something else. They had no idea what, and sometimes the greatest strength an old man can have is knowing when to let others be weak. For 2 days after I signed those papers, I heard nothing or Ethan. My house was quieter, though I didn't mind the silence. I spent those days as I often did, watering the garden, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, and taking slow walks down the street I'd lived for decades. On the surface, life seemed ordinary, but inside me, there was a quiet satisfaction. They believed they had control, and in that belief, they had lowered their guard. What they didn't realize was that the game had already shifted before they even set it into motion. On the third evening, everything changed. I was reading an old history book in my living room when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. At first, I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. When I finally glanced at the screen, I saw Clara's name flashing. 3 missed calls. By the time I picked up the phone, the number had grown to 7. I let it ring one more time before answering, and the first thing I heard was panic. Dad, did you move your money? Ethan just checked the bank and most of it is gone. What happened? Her voice was trembling, almost frantic. Behind her, I could hear Ethan shouting, his words sharp and angry like knives being thrown. Ask him where it is. He had to move it. Don't let him hang up. I stayed calm. Clara, you need to slow down. What are you talking about? The account, Dad, she said, her voice breaking. The savings, the transfers. It's all empty. Ethan says there's barely anything left. What did you do?" I could picture Ethan pacing behind her, face red, veins bulging in his forehead, because money was the one thing he thought he could control. Clara's voice wasn't just worried, it was desperate. I allowed a small pause before answering. "Clara, what made you think I'd hand over my entire life's work without protecting it first?" There was silence. For the first time, my daughter didn't know what to say. Ethan, on the other hand, erupted. I heard his voice roar in the background. "He's lying! He's hiding it! Make him tell us where it is!" I calmly ended the call. I didn't need to explain. Not yet. That night, the phone rang over and over again. By midnight, I had 41 missed calls, every single one from either Clara or Ethan. I set the phone face down on the table and poured myself another cup of tea. The night outside was cool, the air fresh, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Clara stood there, her eyes swollen from crying, while Ethan hovered just behind her, trying to mask his anger with forced composure. Clara stepped forward first. "Dad, please, tell me you didn't do anything foolish. Ethan says this could ruin everything. We need access to your accounts." I leaned against the doorframe, looking at her, not with anger, but with a sadness I couldn't hide. "Clara, when you were a little girl, you used to hold my hand and say you trusted me more than anyone in the world. When did that change? When did you decide I was too old, too weak, to know what's best for myself?" She bit her lip, her eyes watering. "I didn't mean it like that. I just thought, you thought Ethan was right," I interrupted softly. "You thought I'd hand over everything I spent my life building without a second thought. But let me tell you something. Long before you brought me those papers, I had already spoken with an incapable attorney I trust. The accounts you thought were yours to control are secured in a trust, not in your name, not in Ethan's. They're protected, and they're staying that way." Ethan finally stepped forward, his face twisted in frustration. "You old fool! Do you know what you've done? You can't just—" I raised my hand and cut him off. "I can, and I did. I may be 72, but don't mistake age for weakness. I made my decisions while you were too busy plotting behind my back. And I'll tell you this, Ethan, you were never after Clara's best interests. You were after mine, my house, my savings, my life's work. Well, you won't get it." The anger in his face was clear, but Clara's was worse. It was shame. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. You thought I needed saving," I said, my voice firm but not cruel. "But I don't. What I needed was respect. What I needed was for my daughter to stand by me, not stand over me." Clara broke down, covering her face with her hands. Ethan muttered something under his breath and stormed away from the porch, too proud to stand in the presence of someone he could not manipulate. I didn't follow him with my eyes. My focus, Clara. For the first time, I saw her not as the confident, headstrong woman who thought she knew everything, but as my little girl again, broken, confused, and realizing too late what she had done. I reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Clara, you are my daughter. That will never change. But understand this. I will not hand over my life as if it means nothing. I raised you to stand strong. Now you'll have to learn that, so will I." She nodded through her tears, and though I didn't know if she fully understood yet, I could see the lesson beginning to sink in. That night, the phone was silent. No missed calls, no shouting voices, just peace. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly, knowing the turning point had finally arrived. 2 days later, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on my driveway. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. Clara and Ethan had finally decided to face me in person after the silence that followed my refusal to answer their calls. I could feel the tension air before they even knocked. When I opened the door, Clara was standing there, her face pale and streaked with makeup she hadn't bothered to fix. Ethan stood beside her, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. They weren't here for a family visit. They were here for war. "Dad," Clara said quickly, her voice quivering, "please, we need to talk. Just let us in." I stepped aside and let them walk into my home. They sat at the dining table, The same table where only days before I had signed the papers that they believed gave them control. This time, though, I didn't sit as a man about to be cornered. I sat as a man who held every card they didn't know existed. Ethan wasted no time. He slammed his hand on the table and glared at me. "Where is it? Don't play games with us, Henry. The money. The accounts. What did you do?" I folded my hands calmly and met his anger with silence. He leaned forward, his voice rising. "You think this is a joke? Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything Clara and I planned." At that, I finally spoke. "Destroyed? No, Ethan. I protected everything I built. There's a difference." Clara's eyes darted between us, wide with panic. She placed her hand on Ethan's arm, as if trying to calm him, but he shook her off. She turned back to me, her voice breaking. "Dad, please, just explain. Where is the money?" I sighed and leaned back. "Clara, you told me I was too old to decide anything. You believed I wasn't capable of handling my own life anymore. That was your mistake. You underestimated me. Before you ever handed me those papers, I sat down with my lawyer. Everything you thought you gained, the accounts, the property rights, was already secured in a trust. Not $1, not one brick of this house is in your control, and it never will be as long as Ethan is pulling your strings." Clara gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Ethan shot to his feet, his face crimson with rage. "You can't do that. You signed the papers." I looked at him steadily. "Yes, I signed, but those papers gave you access to almost nothing. You thought you were clever, but while you were planning how to take from me, I was already 3 steps ahead. That's the difference between greed and wisdom." Ethan's chest heaved as he shouted, "You'll regret this, old man. You can't just humiliate me like this." I stood too, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the room. "No, Ethan. You've humiliated yourself. You walked into my home, into my life, thinking you could strip me of everything I earned. You forgot that I am not your pawn. I am not your wallet. I am Clara's father, and I will not let her be dragged down by your greed." Clara burst into tears, her shoulders shaking as she whispered, "Dad, I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought this was the right way." I turned to her, my heart heavy. "Clara, I spent my life protecting you. When your mother passed away, it was me who held you through the nights you cried. It was me who worked extra hours to pay for your education, who gave up everything so you could have a better future. And now, when I need nothing from you but respect, you tell me I'm too old to decide. That was the moment you forgot who I am, not just your father, but the man who built the life you've lived." Her tears fell harder, and for the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I see it now. I let Ethan convince me that this was right, but I see how wrong I was." I held her hand, squeezing it gently. "I forgive you, Clara. You are my daughter, but forgiveness doesn't erase the lesson. You must learn to stand by what is right, even when someone whispers comfort into your ear, especially when that comfort is built on selfishness." Ethan scoffed, muttering under his breath, "This is ridiculous," before storming toward the door. He yanked it open and left without another word. The sound of his car tires screeching down the street echoed in the night. Clara stayed behind, sobbing quietly. She leaned into me like she hadn't done in years, resting her head on my shoulder. "Dad, I don't deserve your kindness after what I did." I stroked her hair, my voice softer now. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we face them. You lost sight of who I am, but tonight, you remembered. That is enough for me." The room was quiet after that. The storm had passed, and what remained was the fragile thread of a relationship I hoped could heal. I knew Clara had a long road ahead, choices to make, consequences to face. But for the first time in days, I felt the weight lifting from my chest. The power they thought they had over me was gone, replaced by the strength I had always carried. The climax wasn't about money, or property, or papers. It was about dignity. It was about reminding them, and myself, that growing old doesn't mean losing the right to live with pride. That night, as I sat back on my porch and watched the sky turn dark, I finally felt peace. They had tried to take my life away piece by piece, but instead, they gave me the chance to prove something far greater, that wisdom, love, and courage will always outlast greed. The days after that confrontation felt different. My house was quieter, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the heavy silence that had hung over me before. I no longer felt like a man waiting to be pushed aside. I felt like myself again, standing on the ground I had built with my own hands. For 72 years, I had lived through struggle, sacrifice, and love, and no piece of paper, no angry son-in-law was ever going to take that away from me. I thought often about Clara. She didn't call right away after Ethan stormed out of my house that night. For 2 days, I heard nothing, but on the third morning, as I sat on my porch with my tea, she pulled into the driveway alone. She stepped out of the car slowly, her shoulders slouched, her face tired as if she hadn't slept. When she walked up the steps, I noticed she didn't carry a folder this time. She didn't come with demands. She came with humility. "Dad," she said softly, her voice cracking. "I don't even know where to start." I motioned for her to sit beside me. She hesitated before lowering herself onto the chair. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, watching the breeze move through the trees. Finally, she spoke again. "I let him convince me that I was helping you. I wanted to believe it was the right thing, but deep down, I knew I was taking away your voice. I'm ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed I let greed and fear blind me. You didn't deserve that. Not after everything you've done for me." I studied her face. For the first time in a long time, I saw not the sharp, confident woman who always had answers, but the daughter who once ran into my arms after her first heartbreak, the girl who cried when she lost her mother, the child who had trusted me with every secret. She was vulnerable again, and she was finally speaking the truth. "Clara," I said gently, "you lost your way, but admitting it is the first step to finding it again. I'm not angry anymore. I was hurt, yes, but anger has no place between us. What matters is whether you learn from this. You must remember, respect is not optional. It is the foundation of love. Without it, love crumbles into control and fear." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I know. I let Ethan influence me. I let him make me believe you were weak, when you've always been the strongest person I know." We sat in silence again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was healing. For the first time since all of this began, I felt that maybe my daughter truly understood. Later that week, Clara called me again. She told me she had left Ethan's side for a while, staying at a friend's house. She said she needed time to think about her life and the choices she had made. I didn't ask questions or push her. That was her journey now. Sometimes the lessons we learn through pain are the ones that stay with us forever. As for me, I returned to my routines. I tended my garden, took my walks, and met with old friends. But something had changed inside me. I no longer carried the quiet fear that my age made me less valuable, less capable. I had faced that lie head-on and proven to myself, and to those who doubted me, that wisdom grows sharper with time, not duller. I also realized something important. Getting older does not mean losing control of your life. It means choosing carefully what battles to fight, what truths to stand on, and what legacy to leave behind. My legacy to Clara wasn't just money, or property, or a house filled with memories. It was the lesson that respect cannot be bought, and dignity cannot be stolen. One evening, Clara visited again. This time, she didn't come with tears or shame. She came with hope. She brought a simple dinner she had cooked herself, and we sat at the same dining table, where everything had almost fallen apart. The meal wasn't fancy, but the conversation mattered more. She asked me about my stories from when I was young, about how I managed to raise her alone after her mother died. She listened, truly listened, in a way she hadn't in years. As we finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I don't know how long it will take, Dad, but I want to earn back your trust. I don't want money. I just want to be your daughter again." Those words, more than any apology, were what I needed to hear. I smiled at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe the bond between us wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe it was only bent, waiting to be straightened again with patience and love. Looking back, I realized the real climax of this story wasn't just exposing Ethan or outsmarting their plan. The real climax was rediscovering my own strength and seeing my daughter rediscover her own conscience. Money comes and goes. Houses age. Papers mean nothing in the end. What remains is the love between a parent and child, and the hope that even through mistakes, forgiveness can bring light back into the cracks of a broken bond. I don't know what Clara's future holds, or whether Ethan will remain in it, but I do know this. She has seen who I truly am, and she has remembered the father who never stopped loving her, and that is enough for me. So, if there's anything I want others to take from my story, it's this. Never let anyone make you believe that age takes away your right to decide, your right to live with dignity, or your ability to protect what you've built. Age is not weakness. Age is power, sharpened by experience and guided by love. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to my channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.